The best places to work in the federal government, says NASA. The Government Accountability Office and the Congressional Budget Office delivered the best workplace results. This year's work included the challenges the COVID-19 pandemic caused. Loren DeJonge Schulman is Vice President for Research and Evaluation at the Partnership for Public Service. She's former Chief of Staff to the Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Affairs. Loren, thanks very much for coming on the program. As I look at these numbers, the phrase that came to my mind was the rich keep getting richer and the poor keep getting poorer. What are the trend lines that you see in this year's work?
Francis, you're alluding to the remarkable success of NASA, which I will talk about a little bit later. But this was a remarkable, hopefully never to be repeated year in the federal government in 2020. And our 2020 best places to work in the federal government data showed that federal leaders more than rose the challenge in so many ways in helping their workforce transition to remote work, in executing remote delivery for the American people, and the enormous number of new challenges that COVID-19 presented for the federal government. The data we collected shows that federal leaders, particularly supervisors, proved enormously dedicated to their teams and their missions at a point where things could have been totally chaotic. And the majority of federal leaders understood and met the needs of the workforce during a really difficult time.
What did the employees who were happiest say they liked the most about what their leaders did or gave them or provided or whatever?
So in this survey, there was a number of new questions specifically related to COVID. And the Office of Personnel Management did a great job of thinking through what's really important for us to learn in this time period. So the things that they asked about were whether their organizations supported their mental and physical well-being during the pandemic, whether they received the resources they needed to do their work, particularly remotely, whether their agencies were able to successfully deliver on missions in the midst of a crisis with all of this going on, and if they had leaders who communicated effectively and prioritized their welfare, even from doing so across the country on Zoom and Teams and all the technical issues that come from that. In all of those cases, federal leaders scored extraordinarily high given the circumstances. Above 80 points out of 100 in all of those questions, and with supervisors receiving remarkably good feedback from their employees across the board.
Did you see any impact on the broader numbers that we've been collecting for years and years based on the impact of the kinds of COVID effect that you just described, Loren? For years, we've been seeing that overall, broadly, employees like their boss and maybe their boss's boss, and they're not as sure about what's 2 or 3 levels up the chain, that kind of thing. Any movement in those kinds of numbers because of what we saw through COVID?
Francis, you hit the nail on the head. Supervisors continue to receive high levels of feedback, positive levels of feedback from their workforce. It's when you talk about federal leaders, 1 or 2 or 3 levels across the board, that they receive lower, sometimes 20 points lower, levels of positive feedback from their workforce, who are concerned about whether or not they are being empowered, whether or not they are being prepared appropriately, and whether or not they have an inclusive environment in which to do their work. This is something where supervisors can make a real difference in, but federal leaders at different levels also need to be ready to step up to the plate. And agencies should be thinking through how to grow and prepare and empower leaders so that they're not just doing right at the supervisory level, but thinking through their vision, creating an inclusive environment, and empowering staff.
So Robert Gibbs is a superstar again this year, the Chief Human Capital Officer at NASA. They win again for the 900th year in a row. Who else did well? Who maybe accelerated progress that they've made in the past, Loren?
It's a great question, and you highlighted some of this earlier. Government Accountability Office, which always does remarkably well, placed first, followed by the Federal Trade Commission, with both of them on positive trajectories. Congressional Budget Office topped the chart for small agencies, and little known office of the Inspector General and the Tennessee Valley Authority, one of the smaller subcomponents, recorded the highest score among subcomponents. So all of them continue to be on a higher trajectory.
What are the broader trends for the organizations that are not moving in the right direction? What are the main reasons that we saw this year?
So I think that for all of these cases, you saw leadership being a key driver and key indicator. And when I say the agencies in question, you will understand that those agencies experienced a lot of crisis and a lot of challenge in the past year. Department of Health and Human Services moved from second in 2019 to fourth in 2020. U.S. Agency for International Development, which was on the front lines of responding to COVID-19 across the world, slipped from 14th to 19th in the midsize category. Office of Management and Budget, which has an enormous, impossible job, and amidst COVID-19, I'm sure had a number of new challenges to take on, fell from 6th place to 29th among small agencies. And I know the Biden administration is particularly focused on reversing these trends in employee engagement.
So,
go ahead, Francis.
No, please continue.
I'll just say one more. Citizenship and Immigration Services, a Department of Homeland Security, moved from the top 25% of subcomponents to the bottom 25% of subcomponents. They've been in the news for a number of years for challenges with their mission, resourcing, prioritization, and authority. It's not a surprise in many ways that they're experiencing leadership challenges and the workforce is feeling the hurt.
So about 30 seconds left, Loren. If I am one of these agencies that's moving in whatever direction, and I'm not a human capital leader, I'm at a higher tier or in a different area, what do I do with these numbers to try to make a difference, not just to get better numbers next year, but to really help my employees?
Tell your employees you heard them. Tell them that you understand the challenges they experienced in the last year and you are working dedicatedly over the next year to build stronger leaders, to build more empowered, inclusive teams, and to really understand the challenges that they faced in the last year to make progress on them.
Loren, thanks very much for coming back. It's great to see you again.
Thanks so much, Francis. Great to see you too.